Hello friends, and welcome to the wonderful world of chess. I'm glad you could tune in, and I hope that we'll see a lot of each other. We've devised a series of chess lectures which will introduce you to this wonderful world, and we hope that regardless of what age you are, what level of interest you have, that you'll be able to follow this series and really enjoy this wonderful, wonderful game. It's a game which started many hundreds of years ago near the borders of India and what is now called Iran or ancient Persia. In fact, the king, which is the center and main piece of the game of chess, was originally called the Shah until recently the ruler of ancient Persia, or modern Iran. In Europe and Germany, it's called Shah, and in French it's termed échec, and in English it's come down to us as chess. The only requirements really in following this series is that perhaps you might be interested later on in having a notepad and a pencil to take down some notes, and to purchase a set of chessmen so that you can practice during the week, and or else dig out a set that probably your father or grandfather has in the closet. But I would caution that the chess pieces be kept simple, not one of your fancy sets like the Mexican pseudo-aesthetic sets that you can buy uptown. They're too ponderous and heavy and not easy to interpret one piece from the other. I have before me examples of the Staunton set. Howard Staunton was a 19th century Englishman who designed this set, and it has come down to us, and we use it for our international and local chess tournaments. It's very clear. Everyone can recognize that as a horse. The piece with the cross on the top is the king, and the one with the fancy crown is his queen, and the bishop has the mitred hat, if you can notice the slit in the top like a bishop's mitred hat, and we can recognize that as a turret or a castle. And this simple piece is the foot soldier or the pawn. The Staunton set. I'll write this on the blackboard in case you are asking for it when you go to a store. It's the Staunton design. Now, if we look at our battlefield here, we have the white army and the black army. Now, it doesn't matter. Some of us have, in this case, we have red pieces and black pieces. Some chess sets are brown and yellow. But for convenience, we refer to them as white and black pieces. The same way with the squares. We have the white and the black squares. It is a battlefield composed of 64 squares. And the major pieces are lined up so, with the king right here in the center. The king represented by what I showed you before is the cross. Next to the king is his queen with the fancy crown. And on either side of the king and queen are the clergy, the bishops, the slit in the hat, the mitred hat of the bishop. And each army is represented by the knights of old, the knights who rode on the horses. And at the outer limits of the battlefield itself are the castles, which belong to the king. There are the castles. Now, we call the castles today, we call them rooks. And it's very interesting how that came about to be called a rook, because in the old days in India, they didn't use castles. They had elephants here instead. When the game was introduced into Renaissance Italy, they had a problem, what to do with elephants. The Italians weren't used to elephants, and so they gave the castle, which they used in their warfare, the role of the elephant. And we see some Florentine designs, and where the piece is denoted by an elephant with a castle still perched on the top. Now, the Indian word for the warrior on this elephant is Rook. In ancient India, it looked like this, Rook. What we have done is simply taken away the elephant and kept the castle, but we still refer to it as a rook, R-O-O-K. So in the books you will find it referred to as either a castle or a rook, but that's the meaning, the derivation of the term rook. So again, let's look at the white pieces. Each army has a king, a queen, 2 bishops, 2 knights, and 2 castles. And in front of each of these pieces is a foot soldier or a pawn. P-A-W-N. Pawns are very important in the game of chess. And we'll take all the pieces off and show you how each of them moves, because each piece has a different way of moving. It's not difficult to learn, and it certainly adds to the variety and to the interest of the game. We also, if you're checker players, you'll note that we use every square of the board. We don't use just half the board. Let's look at the battlefield. Battlefield, as I say, 64 squares. Always set up the board so that the white square is on your right-hand side. The white square, not the other way around. The white square is always on your right-hand side. Now, on this board, I have numbers going up from 1 to 8, and across we have letters from A to H. So it's a board 8 by 8. Now, all these lines which go up, we refer to them as files. And all the files are lettered. We have the A file, the B, C, D, E, F, G, and the H file. All the files have lettered names. All the lines going across the battlefield, coming across, we call them ranks. And you can see here where we're tying into the military terminology. We have the rank and file. All the ranks coming across are numbered from 1 to 8. So if I want to refer to a square, a specific square, let's take this square. It's very easy for me to talk about that square because it is E4. E4. This is E5. This is E4. It's very simple. This is the algebraic system of notation. There's another system which we find in some of our English textbooks, which is called the descriptive notation. We'll come to that. Let's discuss the king. The king goes on E1 to start the game. And the queen is always on D1. That's for the white pieces. For the black pieces, they are just opposite them. Now, if you're confused as to whether the king or the queen goes on the white or the black square, the rule is the queen always goes on her own color. So if you have the black pieces, the black queen is on the black square. If you have the white queen on the white square. Now the board, the battlefield, we divide it arbitrarily into 2 sections. We talk about the king side and we talk about the queen side. The king and the queen will divide the board so that we can talk about it into 2 sides. Next, To the king and queen, as I said, come your bishops. And then your knights. And then your rooks. Like that. And in front, all your pawns. I'm starting by discussing how we refer to the, how we use the language of chess to describe our moves before I actually show you how they move themselves, for a very good reason. Now, this square, we said, would be F3. And if I want to put a piece on F3, I say this pawn can move straight ahead one square. I can say pawn moves to F3. And this is how we denote how the pieces move. And the same with the black pieces. Let's talk about how the pieces move themselves. The king can move in any direction, one square at a time. Just one square at a time. The white pieces, I might add, I should have mentioned before, the white pieces always move first. And then you alternate. White moves, black moves, white moves, black moves, like in all board games. The king can move in any direction, one square at a time. The queen, she can move in any direction, as many squares at a time as you want to move her, providing there's not another piece in the way. So the queen can go diagonally, she can go straight up, straight down, she can go across, any direction, as many squares as you would have her move. Because of the mobility of the queen, it is the most powerful piece we have on the board. The bishop, you notice here, we have one bishop on the white squares. We have one bishop on the black squares. The bishop can only move on the diagonal. So if the bishop can only move on the diagonal, you see it has to stay on its own color. It can only move in the diagonal. It has to stay in its own color. So between the two bishops, you cover the entire board. You have 32 squares you can cover with this bishop, and 32 squares you can cover with the other bishop. Now we'll skip the knight for the time being, and let's discuss the rook. The rook can move as many squares as you want to move it, straight up, straight across, straight down. In other words, on the horizontal or on the vertical, along the ranks, up and down the files, as many squares as you want to move it, providing there's not another piece in the way. Now, again, the strength of these pieces are determined by their mobility. Because a rook can cover all colors of the board, it is therefore a stronger piece than the bishop, which is stuck to its diagonal. I have left the knight out for a special reason. Let's talk about the pawns. The pawns can move only straight ahead on their own files. Now, originally when the game started in India, the pawns could only move one square at a time. Each pawn one square at a time. They have since changed the rules a few hundred years ago, and now on each pawn's first move, it can move two squares. You have a choice of moving it either one square or two squares. But once having moved a pawn, you have to then only move it one square at a time. Now an interesting thing happens. When the lowly pawn reaches the end of the board, it can become any piece you would like to make it except a king. And because the queen is so powerful, it is usually promoted to the value of a queen. Even if you haven't a queen on the board, take a salt shaker or a penny or a nickel or something and call it a queen. But when a pawn reaches the end of the board, you can promote it to a rook, knight, bishop, or queen. and that often determines the outcome of the game. The knight I left because it's peculiar. None of the other pieces can move in the way it can move if it's obstructed by another piece. The knight, on the other hand, because it is a horse, it can actually jump over other pieces, providing the square it is going to is vacant. The knight moves in this direction. Say the knight is there. We move the knight up 2 squares and over 1. So let me put pawns where this knight can move. The knight can go up 2 and over 1. It can go up 2 and over 1. It can go across 2 and 1. It can go over 2 and 1, always 2 and 1 in any direction. Go down 2 and 1, and these 2 squares, 2 and 1. So you notice that a knight placed in the center of the board can go to 8 different squares. However, if you put the same knight in the corner of the board, it can only go to these 2 squares, 2 and 1, 2 and 1. Now there's a very good lesson to be learned here, that the more centralized any piece is, the more powerful it becomes, because it has more squares that it can move to. The more a piece is to the corner or to the side of the board, the less powerful it is. So even a queen, if it's hemmed in and hasn't got anywhere to go, is not very strong. Now, it's amazing how fast our time goes, and I always tell people that I can teach them chess in 5 or 6 minutes. We'll see what we can do. So let's quickly review how the pieces move. The king, any direction, 1 square at a time. The queen, any direction, as many squares as you want her to go. The bishop can move only on its original color, therefore on the diagonals, as many squares as you would have them go, providing it's not obstructed. The knight goes up 2, over 2, down 2, and over 1. It's like an L shape. It can move to that square like F3 or H3, providing the square is not occupied. The rooks can move straight up and straight across, as many squares as you would have it go, providing it's not obstructed. And the pawns, you have a choice on moving them either 2 squares on their first move, and then after 1 square at a time, or if you want, you can move it 1 square in its first move. You have that choice. Now, let's look at what the object of the game is. And once you know the object, you can actually play a little game, but you don't need all the pieces on the board. Let's take the king and leave him there. The object of the game is to trap the enemy king. Trap the enemy king. You cannot capture the enemy king. He has to be trapped in such a way so that if he does move, he will be taken. So the game ends before the actual capture of the king itself. I'll show you an example. This queen can go anywhere, as we said. So this queen controls this entire rank. Right? Which means the king, if it's white's move, and the king can move in any direction 1 square at a time, the king can go here, or he can go here. He would like to maybe go here, here, or here. 1 square in any direction. But he is not allowed to move into where he can be captured. It is against the rules of chess to allow your king to move into where it can be captured. If it's black's move, and black moves down 1 square, and because the queen can move anywhere, she is now attacking the king. When she attacks the king, when you attack the opponent's king, you say check. You're warning your opponent that he's in check, and it's mandatory that you warn him. You must say check. Check means that my king is attacked, I have to get out of check. I have to get out of check. Several ways of doing it. I can either move my king out of check. The queen can't go here. She can go along the diagonal and along here, but she can't make a turn. So I can get out of check by moving my king out of the attack. Or, if I have another piece on the board, say I have a bishop here, I can get out of check by putting a piece in the way of the check. The bishop's moved diagonally. So I can get out of check by getting in the way of the attack. Or if it's a black square bishop and I'm in check, in this case, my bishop can come right down and capture the queen. This is the first time we've talked about capturing. Unlike checkers, where you jump a piece and take a piece off, in chess you actually occupy the territory that the enemy had occupied. When the bishop moves diagonally, the queen is attacking the king. It's white's move. White would be wise in this case, instead of just to move out of check, of course, to capture the queen. You take a piece by moving in the direction that your piece can move, diagonally in this case, and you occupy the square that the enemy had, and you take off that piece. That's another way of getting out of check. You're not allowed to move into check, remember that. So if two kings are opposite each other like this, remember that one king cannot approach the other because it is moving into where it can be taken. Two kings can never be like this. It's impossible in chess because you are not allowed to move your king into a square where it can be captured. But in this position, if we get back our queen and say the queen is up here and it's black's move, black queen can move in any direction. So let's move her straight down the board and we say check. Now when the king is in check, he has to get out of check. Where can he go? There's nothing else on the board that can get in the way of the check in this position. There's nothing else on the board for white that can capture the queen. Can the king move out of check? The king can move in any direction, one square at a time. He can't move. If he moves here or here, he's still in check. The queen can move right across. If he moves here, here, or here, he's in check by the king. So the king is in check, but cannot get out of it. And that's checkmate. And that is the object of the game. The object of the game is to checkmate the enemy's king. Again, the opponent, in this case black, is checking our king. The king cannot escape, and we cannot capture the enemy queen. We cannot put a piece in the way. Therefore, the game, that is a checkmate. Now notice, if we put a rook there instead of the queen, the rook can move on the horizontal, on the rank. That's also checkmate. But if this king were here, and the rook came down and said check, our king can actually escape here by moving one. See, this king is not here, it's here, so he can get out of check. But in this case, it's a checkmate. Let's look at what happens in a position like this. We'll bring back our queen, and it's black's move. say we'll move on the F file. Now this would be a checkmate, as we've just seen. Checkmate. The king cannot move without being taken. It's checkmate. See? Say black was just a beginner and decided to move the queen here. Not all the way down. Not all the way down. Now it's white's move. You notice the queen can go in any direction. Therefore, the king only, we only have the king to move. There's not another piece on the board if we're white. The king cannot come up here, cannot come here. The king cannot come in here where the queen is attacking that square. So what happens here? White has to move, but he can't, and there's no check. The king is not being attacked. That's what we call a stalemate. And black would shoot himself in this case because he had a checkmate right there. A stalemate is a draw game. A draw game means neither side wins. Now, if you're playing in a tournament, you get 1 point for a win, you get 0 for a loss, and you get half a point for a draw. In this case, it's a stalemate, it's a draw game. Both sides share the point. They each get a half a point. Now, basically, I've shown you the main rules of, except for 2 rules. I've shown you the basic rules of how the pieces move. But I would suggest, because it might go in one ear and out the other, that you reinforce this by getting a beginner's book on chess. Go over the elements of the game and renew your acquaintance with how the pieces move, what a check is, what a checkmate is, what a stalemate is, the word draw. Just get used to these terms, and also remember how the board is laid out. Remember, we call these the diagonals, we call these the files, the lines going across, we call them the ranks. And the next time we see each other, you'll have all this in your mind, and we'll be able to go on from there and show you something about strategy and tactics. Thank you very much.